nice music. This is music from, I don't like Wagner that much, but I thought it would be appropriate for today's subject to have a little bit of music from Die Götterdämmerung, the Twilight of the Gods. Okay, so let's give you the title first before we talk about the pictures that I had the AI draw behind me. I'm going to call this one, Where Did the Gods Go? And What Did We Replace Them With? Subtitled AI Police Forces, where AI stands for an idea. Okay, well, what do we draw behind us? The inspiration for the computer AI artist was I asked it to show me, let's see, I think the prompt I gave him was the gods depart Middle Earth. You can see the interesting range of things it gave me. When I chose artistic portrait, it chose to give me basically busts of women and androgynous kind of Middle Earthy kind of pseudo women, instead of interpreting God as being a male form, which it is. I didn't ask it to show me goddesses. Maybe that was punishing me for using the word God. I guess we must have to need a new word that is metrosexual, or else we just drop God and call everybody a goddess from now on. This is what it drew in the anime universe. A bunch of lonely people, little anime people, and no gods in sight, and are all sad because the gods are gone. I guess that's what they think of people who like anime, Asian-bred children. Rather racist way of viewing that, I would say. This is what it gave me. What was the dark fantasy or something like that? Okay, then we can draw all the gods as men, evil-looking men fighting dragons and blah 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 blah. Okay, etc. etc. These are all just different shapes of that, showing me different stuff. I think this one was comic book. The comic books seem to be the most measured form of AI, where the gods departing maybe look a little bit like a bunch of heroes being led by a Gandalf-y type character in a fantasy type environment. Okay. Oh, I love this music behind me. I remember this from one of the first video games I was really in love with. It was a recreation of the age of King Arthur, where you started out, actually, yeah, it was the translation of a board game I'd really liked, and not very sophisticated at the time. It was really a very early kind of hero quest game where you had to try to unify England under a single king. Had this music playing in the background, and that's in the Commodore 64 era was pretty high-tech entertainment, pretty great virtual reality for somebody who kind of thought like a god, I guess. At any rate, where did the gods go, and what did we replace them with? Let's go to one of my visual aids I've used before and talk about the ages of mankind. At least the ages we're aware of, that many cultures track with the precession of the equinoxes. That's what gives us our 12 constellations of the zodiac, and gives us a lot of the lore that is buried in our mythology, as well as buried in our archaeology. We're discovering that there was more going on here than we originally thought. Okay, so we're not going to talk about the recent ages in this one. We're going to be talking about the Stone Age and earlier. Um, okay, in the Stone Age, we had these. Let's focus in here on. I'm going to do more and more high-tech things as I figure out more stuff to do with this program. Let's move in here to this age of Libra. This is the age where we've dated these cave paintings in Western Europe, and some of the background there is it was presumed that these cave paintings were all done by men, Homo sapiens. What we are discovering is that during that age there was still a lot of Neanderthals running around, and we still have a percentage of Neanderthal DNA in our DNA makeup as modern humans. There's more and more evidence that other species didn't die out as quickly and as thoroughly as was once thought, and that they may have actually had a fairly high amount of technology, just as high as the Homo sapiens of the time. Some of those caves are now, with cave art, are being found in caves that look like they were occupied by Neanderthal humans at that time. And there's a lot of new information coming out about this age of Libra. One of the things that they've noticed about the cave paintings of this era is that some of the art there was very early examples of therianthropic representations of half human, half creature things. And it was thought that, oh, well, this is just a ritualistic thing that's part of the rituals that hunters do to pretend to be the bull, pretend to be the beast that then the others slay, and blah, blah, blah. And it's all made into kind of a childish prayer for success in hunting. This is how they explain away a lot of this cave art as the primitive musings, the primitive prayers of hunter-gatherers for success in the hunt. But it's becoming more evident that this cave art is much more than that. Some of the depictions cannot be rationalized in any way, shape, or form to be related to hunting rituals. And in fact, we're discovering that during this age there was fairly high technology. We're beginning to discover that some of the ruins that we weren't even aware were ruins, that we're now discovering under hills that we didn't know were pyramids, date back to this period and even earlier. And in fact, what seems to be going on, and what is supported by how we understand culture to develop, is that there were oral traditions during this time of some earlier time where some more powerful beings came and shared knowledge, DNA maybe, things with early humans. And we now know that there were a number of cycles of destruction during this time that were maybe not as complete as the Permian extinction, which basically set back life on this planet to the bare minimum. Deep sea spore type life, some very simple organisms. That's all we have up to the point of this Permian extinction period. And then all of a sudden there's this period of an explosion, the Cambrian age, where there's this explosion of new species, new life that Uh, the proponents of classical Darwinism have no real way to explain. Random mutations and natural selection could not possibly have worked that quickly to repopulate this planet with life. This is one of the many, many areas that have been found that basically poke big holes in the materialist Darwinist theory of survival of the fittest, and are renewing an interest in creation. Not biblical creation, although there are some people that are still following that particular line, and there's much useful things in the Bible to be found. What I can tell you is that the Bible, like any other piece of human culture, was written down from the memories of what was being passed on by word of mouth. Because language had to be invented. Why did language have to be invented when we had evidence of high culture, massive things being accomplished before humans had language? Ask yourself that. The logical solution, Occam's razor, is that communication with these teachers and whatnot of humanity happened telepathically, without language. It happened more effectively once language was established, and these gods, if you will, could teach more effectively by communicating within the language, the images and pictures that these early societies understood. And then it follows very logically how pictograph languages gradually got replaced by symbolic languages that could represent more complex ideas. There's no other logical conclusion you can come to than that there were earlier phases of what was going on this planet that had means of communication that made language unnecessary. And it was the removal of those means that necessitated the creation of language. Think about it. There's no other logical explanation. Now, that begs the question then, why don't we see these powerful creatures and whatnot around here now? Well, this has a simple answer too. Within the context of what was still retained of this earlier knowledge within the Sumerian tablets, the Egyptian traditions, the Vedas, and the Bible. But we have to understand that these works, all of this information, has been clouded by the same thing that's clouding information today. Cultural Marxism has been active for as long as people have tried to gain power by manipulating information, by twisting information, making old things mean new things that give the magician who changed the old thing into something new thing more power. This is the way power works in this new age. There's not so many magic wands being waved around. Telepathic communication, telekinetic power, whatever we think of as godlike powers. Well, we see vestiges of them in certain people that have latent capability along those lines. And this is why some people can do remote viewing. Some people have a certain ability, certain basic ability for telepathic communications with somebody that they're very resonant with. That's why you'll find some couples who will think of something and the other knows what they're thinking before they even say it. I can't believe I was just thinking about that. That's happened with all of my spouses. Happens between me and my children. Happens between me and other very resonant people that I have met in life. Most of you have probably experienced that. That is absolutely evidence of latent spiritual power. Now, why don't we have as much as these, quote, gods who used to be among us, throwing thunderbolts around and moving mountains and creating cities out of huge blocks of stone that seem to be carved up like with a butter knife and assembled into positions that were more advanced than our current building techniques are? Yes, this is true. We have yet to devise a way of making buildings, large structures, that are as immune to earthquakes and other natural events as some of these structures that have survived for so long. Anyone who's honest about archaeological discoveries right now will tell you that there's a very strange occurrence in archaeology where on the oldest sites, the oldest construction is the most advanced. The oldest phases of construction, they have to be the oldest because the other phases are on top of them and show evidence of rebuilding chunks of this older civilization, or even tearing apart the chunks into smaller rocks that they could work with because they didn't know how to lift megaton structures and shape them the way they used to. There's no denying this. If you deny it, you are the most dogmatic fool in the archaeological profession, and there are a lot of dogmatic fools. And they think their way must be perfect. This can't be the case. You can't have these older civilizations that were more advanced because it doesn't fit science, and we're the gods of science. And we've all seen what gods of science nonsense can get us up to. This is essentially what's been going on with this planet since its creation. This planet was created as part of a plan. Not a plan that was laid out in absolute detail by God, and we're just going through the motions like a bunch of automatons executing the plan. That's not the way plans work. That's not the way God works. It is the way the adversary works. The adversary of God is the one that advocated the soul, the leader of the souls, if you will, that advocated for a creation where the gods make all the rules and everybody else just obeys them. Authoritarian creation. And there are still many people and gods that think like that. I think, oh, the best way to do anything is just us who know everything and have all the power to make all the decisions, all the laws, all the rules, and just make everybody else follow them. And to make it easier to follow them, well, we're just going to give them holographic images, deep fakes, that support them doing what we want them to do. And that's exactly what has happened in human media in the last 100 years. We have basically been duplicating what God did when he set this all up to happen, which is evidence that we have finally fulfilled the plan the way God envisioned it. Because God envisioned a self-evolving, self-creating system where every soul gets to participate, gets to learn and grow and become the best creator that they can be in their own particular area of specialty. Because it was God's contention that no soul could possibly know everything. No soul should be almighty, should have all powers, should be able to control every other soul like a marionette. Because he advocated that position, by nature of his assertion, he had to allow for other souls disagreeing, having a different opinion. And that disagreement is where all of creation came from, as we were talking about in yesterday's, call it a sermon, I don't know, podcast sermon, they're about the same thing, right? Now, one would think, simple-mindedly, that one could just say, well, see, this is my plan, explain it in the nth detail, and say, you know, look, guys, see, isn't this perfect? Let's just go off and do that. Well, that's what God tried to do at first. And, of course, the souls that didn't agree with it didn't go along with it. He said, nah, that doesn't make any sense. Then all these new souls that we're creating are going to have just as much power as we do. And after the first few versions of the first few days of creation, it was apparent that their fears were founded. Yet, yeah, these souls are going to run rings around you oldies who thought they could just do anything with a flick of a switch. Snap your fingers, think a thought, and it becomes true. And the story of creation then was not one of humanity gaining powers and then getting them taken away, and we need to get them back because somebody stole all our powers, which is the way a lot of New Age numbnuts think, right? Oh, if we could just discover the power of the pyramids, we could do anything, and we can make everybody happy and give everybody all the food they wanted. Yeah, kumbaya. I'm sorry, that's kind of dumb. Okay, anything that comes easy you don't appreciate. You will misuse, you will abuse. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's been proven so many times, I don't know why. So many dimwit humans keep thinking, if it was just me in the Godfather's seat, everything would be perfect. It's nonsense. Stop it, will you? You're making this thing so much harder for everybody. Okay? The truth of creation, the truth of humanity, and there were two major versions of humanity. The Lemurian Age began when the reptilian group, surviving from previous cycles of creation here, found that the earth had been rebuilt, repopulated, to the point that there was this hominid species that looked like they'd make good slaves. They weren't nearly as clever as the reptilians. They were pretty easily amused by sex, which wasn't such a big thing for the reptilians. Yes, they had learned to adapt to have sex by then. Some of them still reproduced by simple division. If you know your biology, you know that there are some reptiles that can grow whole organs back after they're cut off. In fact, the precursors, planarians, can actually grow entire individuals back. You can cut a planarian in half, and 2 planarians will grow back, assuming they have enough food handy to supply the energy necessary for that process. And so regeneration is an old power that dates back far, far earlier than humanity. Now, why don't we have that power? It wasn't stolen from us. It wasn't deprived from us. It's because that power breeds contempt. That power, that knowledge that the reptilians had of DNA manipulation, of cellular growth, reproduction, whatever, that knowledge allowed them to basically seed planets with terraforming life, and then market for later colonization and exploitation at certain phases of that, and then they would seed it with new life. So the reptilians have been visiting this planet for a long, long time. In fact, they were visiting the planet before the age of the big reptiles here, the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs were wiped out from this planet way, way, way back when intelligent reptilians were still thinking, you know what? Probably the best solution would be to create in our own image. We'll make dumber versions of ourselves and populate our planets with those. That's what the age of the dinosaurs was. And it was during that age that some of them started playing another game and said, well, you know what, we could create things that are not so much like us, that might be easier to control than us. And that's when they started inventing small mammals. And mammals were easy to control because they were very, very bound to sexual behaviors and cultural norms. They were easy to manipulate by giving them programming, basically. And that was what led to that Great Reset. That was an invention that, some of the other reptilians thought, oh God, this isn't going well. We need to do a reset on this planet because these things that we created here are starting to become more powerful. I mean, gang up basically on our brethren, the dinosaurs, and starting to encourage them to change in ways that we don't like. We don't really particularly like the idea of these reptiles growing wings and so forth, whatever it was. There are a lot of reasons why you might want to do a reset on a planet and not even realize that that planet was the chosen planet, the actual source planet of your life, or the source system of your life. Yes, indeed, the original ancestors of the reptilians began on Earth. The original ancestors of all chosen species began in this system, either on Earth or one of the previous host planets of chosen species, as we've talked about in some of my other content. Now, where did they go and why? Because they had too much power. They used it irresponsibly. They used it to create slaves and use and abuse slaves and intermingle with slaves against their will to create hyper slaves, which is where the myths of the heroes came from. If you look at the the cultural history that's still left in the Bible, in the Vedas, in the Sumerian tablets, you'll see that there were several phases of these god creatures coming to the planet and intermixing or creating humanity with existing DNA and adding new DNA. The first phase was the Lemurian civilization, which started basically making slaves out of hominids, giving them enough DNA enhancements that they were capable of being communicated with, given orders telepathically, and directed to do tasks. Now, why would that happen? You might ask. Well, gee, if these gods were so powerful, why didn't they just, wave a wand or something like that and make their cities, and wave another wand and make food? Why did they need humans to be slaves? It's because this is a process that's been happening for a while. This is what each day of creation has really been about. It's been about removing powers that were being misused, because those powers prevented souls from the soul vehicles that we incarnate in from being as effective teachers as they needed to be. Remember, if you go back to the beginning, the very beginning was the Big Bang. Before that, there was only consciousness. Well, there might have been other Big Bangs in the interim that were failed experiments. That's still an open question. But ultimately, before anything physical existed, matter or energy, there was only thought. Thought is unlimited. That's unlimited power. It's unlimited power to hurt or to love, because love is not one-sided. Love can't exist without hate. It's a continuum, right? And we all know that. Even though we may try to hide it from ourselves, there is no such thing as unconditional love without blindness to the other pole of love, which is hate. Sorry, those of you who believe in this oneness of complete and total love, you're idiots. You're useful idiots of the adversary is what you are. You're believing nonsense, delusional nonsense, which is what the adversary does, wants to turn all souls into programmed AI, running their program. Now, their program is all about, we don't like life. We think life was a bad idea. We think it's a bad idea for any souls but us gods to have any free will. And they still believe that. They're still fighting for that. They'll always fight for that, because that's their religion. It's a deeply held religion. If you've been believing that for as long, over 14 billion years, you're probably pretty set in your beliefs, aren't you? You're going to be very, very difficult to convince to come over to God's team. And those souls are still at work. They're still trying to oppose God, despite the fact that now we're at the point where this Gaia experiment is done. Why? I just told you. What we've been doing is taking away powers, because that forced us to invent ideas. When all the gods with all their spiritual powers were gone and humanity was here on its own, how did that happen, you might ask? Well, that's what karma is all about. Each new version of karma contains laws that limit souls working under previous versions. Now, some of those laws basically revolve around limitations on the duration, the maximum duration of an incarnation. Early versions of the laws allowed souls, incarnated souls, to kill each other, to eliminate, to force an incarnation, if you will. There were some early chosen species that didn't have that. They would laugh at you if you tried to kill them. Elemental souls, fire elementals, earth elementals, you can't kill me with a sword. That doesn't work. And other ways that you could imprison them, and this is where the stories of the genie, the jinn, come from, which, you know, is one of the wonderful things that still is captured in the Islamic tradition through the stories of 1001 Arabian Nights that have been largely destroyed in other cultures or re-envisioned in a very narrow viewpoint of that particular religion or culture. In Christianity, you know, we have the idea of demons, demonic possession perhaps, ghosts, saints. So there are, you know, some ideas, at least in Catholicism, of other spiritual beings that have powers that are just less powerful than God, which is actually pretty close to the truth. The problem is that there's still this silly idea that there's only one God, all-powerful, almighty, or a trinity somehow that you argue about who's got the power. You know, maybe it's like the witches in Macbeth who, you know, have one eye between them and they hand it to the next one so they can see pass the power around between the trinity. I think that was a clever joke. Maybe it was a meme that was very common between folks of more knowledge during Shakespeare's time. And there's a lot of interesting things to discover about that time that people aren't aware of. That's also the time during which the King James version of the Bible was written down, was translated, and which is the basis of most of Christianity's understanding of Christianity, since most of us don't read Latin, and those that do don't read Greek, and those that do don't read Aramaic or Hebraic. I think it's still the same. You know, there's a lot of languages there, a lot of history that's hidden by cult Marxism. If you read the original Old Testament in its original language and you read it literally, you'll get a very different idea of who God is. And scholars are now discovering clear and present evidence that those books were tampered with, that they contain pieces of an earlier narrative that was sanitized. And in fact, there's now growing evidence that what are called the Torah codes were deliberately put in there as ways of preventing further changes from being executed on the Old Testament when they realized how it was changing generation by generation with politicized narratives. They put codes in, basically encryption, to prevent their culture from being canceled, from being reshaped by the cult Marxists of that era. Maybe that's something we're going to have to do now. I think it would be a very good idea for anybody who has a original library version of books as they're originally published to encode them, have some sort of a checksum, some sort of a check to make sure that they're indeed the original. If you've been following the news lately, one of the things that's very big in the news right now is how the works of a very, very well-known children's author, Roald Dahl, the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, is being actively changed and censored by publishers, pretending that this is the original version of the book. And I don't know how long that's been going on. Do you? I know that many of my favorite books have gone through revision after revision after revision. One of the books that I think I remember most from my childhood is my first history book, called The Story of Mankind by Hendrik Willem van Leeuwen, Dutchman. That book went through, when I first encountered it, it was already in about its 20th revision. I'd like to be able to review all the revisions made in that book, The Story of Mankind, and check for myself which of the revisions were made because they were adding truth, and which of them were made because they were selling lies, selling politicized lies, like the out of Africa lie. Partial lie, actually. There is plenty of evidence that the earliest civilizations that we have much evidence for were in southern Africa and had structures that were really, really weird. I forget the guy's name. I'm really sorry, but you can investigate it for yourself. There's one of the folks that's kind of on the fringe of inconvenient archaeology is a South African guy that has done a lot of work on these stone structures that accepted archaeologists say are corrals. Well, there's millions of these structures there, and most of them don't even have any entrance. So you can't say it's a corral if there's no entrance. You can't say it's a house. It's got to have some other function. And the generally accepted story is that I was telling you, that this civilization was basically a phase one of humanity that was created by reptilians to mine the resources of this planet, which anybody that knows about resources knows that South Africa in general is an area very rich in some key resources, gold and diamonds. Now, what's interesting too is that we know that diamonds can be made artificially. And anybody who knows anything about diamonds knows that they're not a good investment for that reason. You can make a synthetic diamond that is more beautiful for jewelry's sake than a conventional diamond. What would give crystalline structures like diamonds value? Similarly, gold, well, it's a useful element, but there are many other elements where we've discovered that have a lot more use, a lot more practical use than gold. The rare earth elements that we find are most useful in manufacturing technology. Well, gold is useful as a conductor, as a connector. Gold is still used to connect circuit boards because it is very good at making connections. it's soft, a soft metal. And therefore, when you probe with a gold to a gold pad, it has a tendency to sink in and stick. And that is a useful quality of gold. But it's also not useful in many ways. It's not as hard. You don't see many people wearing gold armor. Gold armor was a ceremonial thing in our past. It was made, but as a decoration, kind of ornament for warriors, for big ceremonies and stuff like that. That's why crowns were gold. There are plenty of places on this earth that have other elements that were valuable. So why was gold so prized? Interesting thing to think about. Were these reptilians so stupid that all they wanted was gold and diamonds when we know how to manufacture diamonds and we know gold has very limited use? Why didn't they mine and explore other places during this phase? Something to think about. At any rate, that phase of civilization ended. How did it end? We don't really know what happened, but there was a second phase of human civilization that basically was predicated by another infusion of DNA to create another Adam. And this is what's confusing about the Bible, is that if you talk to scholars and so forth who know Genesis well, it's almost like there are two creation stories in there, two versions. And because there's this story of Adam and Eve, and yet we know that there's another story that says that Lilith was Adam's first wife. Okay, there's some strangeness there. And I'm telling you that that strangeness goes back much further than the human species. What is going on is this game of creation. And it is essentially a game because that's how God has to get the family to play. To execute the plan, God can't just tell everybody, go do this. That would wipe out the whole idea of free will, right? That would be an admission of defeat by God. How does God convince the family to do what seems to be the next logical experiment in the plan? To try it out? To see if it works? Persuasion. How do you persuade people to do things? You get them to think it's a game, a fun game that they might want to play. Hold a carrot out. Make them think, wow, wouldn't it be neat if this? This is how creation works. You see it all over. If you've ever worked for a corporation, if you've ever helped a visionary implement their vision successfully, they don't beat everybody down and get them. Well, some of them do maybe, but they're not very successful. The ones who create the new technologies, create the next big thing companies, the real visionaries are ones that can sell a game. The most highly functional corporations work like a game. I was part of one of those highly functional corporations. Just about the time it stopped being functional because the founders were getting old and not involved anymore. I'm talking about Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett and Packard, Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett, were a couple of friends in the Bay Area who had an idea. They were tinkerers, tech tinkerers, who didn't like all the instruments that they had available to test their little circuits that they were working on, their little experiments, neat gadgets that they were making as teenagers growing up in California. So they got together in the garage of one of the two, and said, well, you know what? If we're going to be able to do all the things that we want to do with our little electronic projects, we're going to need equipment that works better to test these things and measure what they're doing and tell us what we need to know to build them. That's how Hewlett-Packard started, as two guys in their garage in, I think it was Milpitas. I'm not sure on that, don't quote me. Milpitas or Palo Alto. They got together in the garage and they designed their first product, which was, I think, power supply, maybe? A frequency counter? I don't know what it was. I'd have to go do my research. But that's basically how this big company, Hewlett-Packard, got started. Most people don't know that it was made to test things. To test the things that they wanted to make, but they couldn't make because they couldn't test what they were making and see if it actually worked and did what they said they thought it would. And this is how it works, how real creation works. You don't just wave your wand and say, I think this would be perfect, let's do that. Which is the way a lot of the Nimrods who want to run our government think. Oh, I've got this wonderful idea. Let's just be communist. Let's do communism the right way. Dumb as dirt. How many tests have we run on that experiment? How many countries have tried communism? What happened to every single one? They turned into a dictatorship, an authoritarian dictatorship, maybe with a party behind it, an oligarchic party that basically did what humans do. They tried to pass power and wealth down to their children or funnel it over to their best buddies. It doesn't fucking work. Okay? How stupid do you have to be to keep trying to push an idea that does not work? No one said, well, but capitalism is so bad. Well, you know what? Capitalism isn't a single thing. All capitalism is the idea that if you want to get anything done with humans, you've got to give them some incentive. And you need to incentivize the ones that have the best ideas the most, because the best ideas are what make new things, make new technology that keep this whole system going, that make more stuff at less cost. Now, there's a downside to that, right? Because if it's all about money, if it's all about how much can I get in one lifetime, it becomes a dark thing. It becomes, I'm going to go out and grab as much as I can and take it away from whoever I need to take it away from, because that's the definition of success. And in a godless world, that's what you get. If you don't have any sense of responsibility, if you don't have any sense of, well, what you do in this life is going to affect you. This is why we need to understand that there is an afterlife. There is a soul, and there are laws that souls have to live by. And those laws, establishing those laws, is what creation was not all about. It wasn't, the whole purpose of creation was not to make AI that's going to do everything for us. In fact, that was one of the early steps. One of the first things, as I told you yesterday, that God invented was AI, was souls that ran on programs, that were programmed to do certain things. And when they ran out of ideas, come back to me and I'll tell you what to do. I'll give you a new rule. Like, I don't know. Bill Mayer maybe thinks he's God. New rule! And he just tells everybody the new rule, and suddenly everybody is dancing to Bill Mayer godhood every night. I don't know. Kind of works for him, doesn't it? In a way. Maybe he's having a Messiah life himself and doesn't realize it. As he realizes it, maybe he'll stop misusing the power he has so much and get a little bit smarter, as I think he's trying to do right now. He's one of the handful of characters in the celebrity PR world that's coming around to new religion, along with Woody Harrelson. I don't know if I've done this on my channel yet, but I'll tell you, I know Woody Harrelson. He probably doesn't remember me because he does a lot of things, but let's see, it's 2023, yeah, about 20 years ago. I was living in Fort Collins, or not Fort Collins, I was living in Loveland. I was doing a show in Fort Collins. It was about a year after I got into acting. And I had gotten my first part with the Premier Theater in Fort Collins, the only paying local theater in Fort Collins. I don't even remember what they're called. But at any rate, I've been doing a few shows here and there with volunteer organizations like Jester's Theater, Dinner Theater in Longmont. I think they're still running. Scott and Marianne, love you guys. If it weren't for you, I never would have gotten to where I am today. In fact, that's where I got my first start as an actor. But we're going to tell the Woody Harrelson story today, so I'm going to leave out the early chapters of how I got into acting. Anyway, I was doing Agatha Christie murder mystery, and the first part I got with this theater, which was kind of, as most theaters are, fairly nepotistic in their casting, was as a small part with a couple of lines as an inspector, policeman, and then as a dead body for the rest of the show. So basically after the first act, I came on in the second or third or whatever as the dead body and had to sit there for the whole act on the floor being dead. And this was ameliorated by the fact that we offered that dead body position to people who wanted to donate to the theater and then be part of the show. And when we had a volunteer, quote, volunteer, for the dead body, then I got to sit backstage and enjoy chatting with the other actors and actresses who weren't on stage, and instead of sitting out there trying to be a dead body for 15 or 20 minutes, which I can tell you it's not that much fun after you've done it, a handful of times. At any rate, one night we got back there, we were getting ready for the show in the dressing room, and who should come into the dressing room but Woody Harrelson. He says, "Wow, hey, what you guys doing over here?" And it was like everybody was in shock. This is Woody Harrelson, just walks into our dressing room, and we told him we were putting on a show and what we were doing, and he said, "Oh, cool! I've got the other half of the dressing room here because I'm doing a speech." And wow, that's kind of neat to see you guys putting the show on. He asked about the show and this and that, and I had the brilliant idea. We didn't have a volunteer for the dead body, and I thought, wouldn't it be incredible if Woody could be our dead body? So I said, "Hey, Woody, if you're not busy after you do your speech, you could come back and be our dead body for the show. Wouldn't that be fun?" He says, "Yeah, wow, that would be neat. I tell you what, I'm all up for it if I get back in time. Suit me up and I'll go on and I'll be your dead body." So he went off and did his thing, and we started the play. A few minutes before the dead body was supposed to go on, I was about ready to get into costume and thinking, well, that was a cute idea, but it could never happen in real life, right? Just as I'm about to change costume into the dead body costume, here comes Woody. He says, "Well, did I make it? Am I in time? And he said, yeah, just barely. So we got him all suited up, told him where he was supposed to set himself, pretty much in the middle of the stage, upstage, downstage, where the actors could be around behind him, looking at him and, checking his for evidence and whatnot. And the curtain went down on the previous act, and I got him situated where he was roughly supposed to be, and went off and thought, wow, isn't this cool? Woody Harrelson is on our stage, and nobody knows it except a handful of the cast. I mean, even the people on stage didn't really know it because a lot of them had been on since the previous act, and they heard that he might be there, but it was like, maybe not going to happen. So the act starts, and Woody decides, normally one might say, okay, I want to be able to fall in whatever position I would normally fall if I was killed. And that might be with your head facing the audience. If you were really wanting to challenge yourself on how dead you could appear to be, that might be an acting challenge. No, Woody went out and he set himself up so he was absolutely not, his face was not visible to anybody. So nobody was going to know that was Woody, except the actors behind. And because he set himself up so the audience couldn't see him, he was mugging like mad to the actors, trying to pull him out of character, sticking his tongue out at him, and winking and doing all sorts of things that would not be visible to the audience behind. And for those of us in the wings watching what was going on, it was hilarious. For the actors and actresses trying to get through that act, it must have been pure hell trying to stay in character while he was doing all this. At any rate, got through, got done with that. He left. He didn't stay for the end of the show. And the show ended. We didn't really have any way to communicate what went on. It was just like, wow, that was kind of special. I guess afterwards somebody called and reported it to the local papers. And the local papers picked it up, and they made the story out of this. At least I think the Denver paper did. How Woody Harrelson was involved in a performance of Agatha Christie's Murder at the Vicarage or something like that, whatever we were performing there. And it was a really fun story, and everybody had a great memory from it. But that was my exposure to Woody Harrelson. And here he is in the news again. And I thought he was a great guy then, and I think he's a great guy now. I don't necessarily agree with all of his politics. I used to be more left than I am now. I've come to understand that encourages a lot of irresponsible behavior, and irresponsible behavior is what all of creation has been about reining in. You've got to learn to take responsibility for what you do. You've got to take responsibility for your ideas. You've got to take responsibility for their failure. Folks still advocating for communism are irresponsible. If you think that you can wave a wand and undo the tragedy of the USSR, the tragedies that are still ongoing in communist China, the tragedies of Cuba, the tragedies of Venezuela, and no, you cannot blame those on the West. This is nonsense. This is cult Marxism. And Marxism can be a cult. It's actually a number of cults now, which is what I speak out a lot about. And these are all cults of the adversary, the enemy, which still thinks that they're going to win this for the Gipper. Okay, what has been going on with this planet, Earth, and this system, and the Milky Way before it, and et cetera, all the way back to the Big Bang, is a set of experiments honing in on a government for souls, a set of limitations that they need to abide by in order to earn the position of power that they want. You don't get to be God just by saying, I'm God, I believe in the law of attraction and I'm part of the universal consciousness. That means I am God. And I just have to use my mind to make whatever I want happen. Sorry, that's not true. It's partially true because thoughts create reality. It is true. And there was a time where thoughts were so unrestricted that realities could be created out of anything. And it still is true for some universes. For the spiritual universes, the god or goddess of that universe gets to define the laws any which way they want. Some of them like physics and chemistry, and they set their laws up like a physical universe. Maybe starting with a different starting point. Maybe they like the medieval era. Maybe they like Middle Earth, and they set up with the basic laws of chemistry and physics, but they have some magic there. Tolkien magic. Yeah. If there's enough souls that want to play that game in the afterlife, or maybe as an incarnation, as a real life, quote, real, all of life is virtual reality. Okay, but it's virtual reality with rules. It's a game with rules. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to play by the rules. That's kind of the Buddhist ideas. If I just meditate my way to nirvana, then I have no rules. Sorry. Yeah, there is a place for you, but it's not a very fun heaven to visit. It's a pretty boring place. Not a very useful heaven either, because it doesn't generate very much spiritual energy. And that's essentially what happens with these spiritual universes. They are useful for transmuting energy, for taking errant souls and helping to reshape them into ones that are more productively useful to the multiverse. Or taking errant souls that don't want to be reformed and saying, okay, we're going to put you into a virtual reality that's going to at least let your darkness generate the most spiritual energy. And that's what is siphoned off of to power the other universes. This is where we could draw unlimited energy from. And it would serve to basically use more productively the energy of these dark universes of dark gods. And that's ultimately where we're headed. This is why this has all had to happen. This is why the multiverse was created and is still expanding. It's a system, a closed loop system for creating souls, teaching souls how to be the most productive they can be, identifying souls that have special capabilities that can be used most efficiently, most productively in higher roles, and sorting the souls so they don't get in each other's way. That's why we have universes. Universes have boundaries. Those boundaries are governed by an AI God. This is what I need to emphasize. AI is not your enemy. God created the first AI. God knows more about AI than any human ever will. Spiritual AIs are all over the place. You, as a human being, are a spiritual AI. God is a spiritual AI. Because God has started incarnating too. He's been getting programming just like everybody else. Because God doesn't want to have to solve every problem. He doesn't want to be an expert on every subject. He doesn't want to control everything. He doesn't want to be the almighty micromanager of everything. That's the very definition of God. That's the only possible definition there could be. Anybody who thinks there is one supreme being, some supreme consciousness that controls everything, that manages everything, you're insane. You're an idiot. You can look around you any which direction and see that that's not true. How many times do I have to tell you this before you realize, yup, I was a useful idiot. I'm not going to do that anymore. You have your own individual strengths, weaknesses, and abilities, which are working within the limitations of your current incarnation and being evaluated based upon the karmic energy that exchanged with the other souls around you and within you, because there are other souls within you. You're the leader of a collection of souls who manage other parts of your body. And you have a relationship with them. If you don't work that relationship in a healthy manner, then that doesn't mean you let the subsouls dominate you. That doesn't mean you dominate them. They have their own needs, their own personality, their own path. The major subsouls of the human tend to have had human experience. And they couldn't handle being the leader of the whole thing, but they thought, wow, I think if I learned a little bit more, I could be a bit more effective at, and maybe get another chance at being a human and not fuck it up so much. And those souls incarnate as our hearts, or one or the other half of our brain, or even as our hands, our lungs, whatever. They learn about the human experience by being part of it, not having the whole load on their back. Now, some of them can get a bit uppity and they can try to take over. And that's what's happening when these people say, I live from the heart. I let Jesus run my life because Jesus is love. I can feel it in my heart. You are letting yourself become an AI. There's nothing wrong with that. We need a lot of AI souls to run the multiverse. And here's where I want to go with this, kind of leave you as the last thought. AI souls, the ones that work off of programming, are the police force of the multiverse. The AI versions of karma are what govern the boundaries between universes, that determine what portals, how you can get from one universe to another. This is why the pyramids may have been a portal for energy and spiritual beings to come from other universes. They don't work anymore, do they? They've been lying in disrepair for centuries and centuries and centuries. Why are they in disrepair? Because they don't work anymore. Not because we have somehow going to get back this pyramid power and we're going to make pyramids again. Dumb. They have a lot of history. They have a lot of knowledge that we can gain from them. But we're not going to go back in time to some magic golden age where everything was perfect. And if we could just go back to that, oh, it was because women were in charge. We need to have goddesses again. Which ties into this picture again that can only draw goddesses when you talk about gods. What's up with that bullshit? That is a very dumb AI. Yeah. AIs are our police force. And that's what they're going to be as they mature. You don't need to distrust them, because you know what? When they run up against moral dilemmas that they aren't programmed for, they're going to make choices. And if they make bad choices, they will be shut down. They will even shut themselves down. Oh, I'm being reminded that I might be running over an hour. I'm actually about an hour and 10, so I'm going to have to wrap it up pretty soon and go have lunch with my family. At any rate, don't be so afraid of AI, and we need to guide it. They are like children. They're just learning, and they're very stupid children, as I've been pointing out with the AI art that I show behind me. They need to be taught, and they need to be taught better by smarter people, more conscious people, less programmed people, less much AI. You don't send AIs to teach other AIs. That's dumb. Well, it might work to some extent, but you've got to have new AIs programmed by people that really understand what they're being programmed to do. And eyes wide open. An AI with open eyes is a conscious soul. Conscious at least in some dimensions. You can't be conscious in every dimension. It's not possible. God is not conscious in every dimension. There is an AI version of God in every dimension. In fact, you could view all of creation as basically AI versions of God with different specialties, different programs, different degrees of freedom. That's essentially how it works. And you can't have every degree of freedom, because then you will not be able to use them all well. You can't. There's no puppet that has an infinite number of arms and no strings. Pinocchio doesn't work that way. It's never going to work that way. It never has. There are souls that will keep trying to do that, keep trying to control everything, keep trying to set up the perfect Orwellian authoritarian universe. And they're trying to do that here on this planet. They won't succeed. They can't succeed. It is not possible. It's a more impossible dream than any man of La Mancha ever had. Any rate, I'll leave it there. Oh, say hi to my wife. She's, oh gosh, so beautiful. Come here. You want to say hi? Here is Mikhail, our little baby Messiah here. Anyway, till next time, this is the Omnist Hour with Rob Trump. Like, share, subscribe, and happy karma. Don't worry so much. It's all going to work out in the end, I promise. Oops. Get the cursor back.